Welcome to Earth Archives. When it comes to mysterious areas on the Earth, many people will think of the Bermuda Triangle. There have been endless cases of strange disappearances since records began. It is difficult to find clues. Today, 3 cases are presented. You think. Before the show starts, please subscribe, like, and turn on the little bell. If possible, leave your thoughts. This will help the growth of the show. Without further ado, let's officially start. Bermuda is a famous tourist destination in the Atlantic Ocean, but it is associated with a terrifying name. In geography, there is no such division as the Bermuda Triangle, but advocates of the mysterious phenomenon combine Bermuda, the United States, Miami, Florida, and San Juan, Puerto Rico, simply drew 3 connecting lines to form a triangle, and then claimed that inexplicable disappearances of ships and planes had occurred many times in this area, calling it the Devil's Triangle. Some even claim that there are multiple such Devil's Triangles on the Earth, and the more famous one is the Devil's Sea in Japan. This statement has been exaggerated by countless articles and books, and has become more and more popular. It is not only a household name, even some professionals believe it to be true. For example, the China Marine Information Network, sponsored by the National Ocean Information Center, also regards the Bermuda Triangle as a marine wonder and ocean mystery, and has included several related articles. According to Lloyd's records, 428 ships have been reported missing worldwide since 1955, and you may be interested to know that our intelligence services have found no evidence to support that there are more disappearances in the Bermuda Triangle than elsewhere. Statement. U.S. Coast Guard computer records of Atlantic incidents dating back to 1958 support this conclusion. From this point of view, the so-called Bermuda Devil Triangle mysterious phenomenon does not exist at all. The mystery is how this mysterious phenomenon was concocted and spread. This must start with a famous air crash in the history of American aviation, the disappearance of the 19th U.S. Navy Squadron. 1. Missing Plane Group. The 19th Flight Squadron consists of 5 Avenger torpedo bombers and 14 pilots, including 5 pilots. The others are radio operators and gunners. 4 of the planes were flown by student pilots, and the 5th plane was piloted by Captain Charles Taylor, the squadron leader responsible for training these students. At 2 p.m. on December 5, 1945, these 5 aircraft took off from the featuring Lauderdale Naval Air Base in Florida for flight training. The scheduled route was to fly eastward from the Florida Peninsula across the Atlantic Ocean to the Bahamas Islands. Then we turned back to Fort Lauderdale, a journey of about 300 miles, and the plane carried enough gasoline for a 6-hour flight. At 4 p.m., the base received a signal of trouble from Taylor. At this time, the plane had reached the sky over the Bahamas, but instead of turning back south and west as planned, it continued to fly north and east, farther and farther away from the mainland, and towards the deep sea of the Atlantic Ocean. The last communication received by the base was shortly after 7 o'clock. At that time, the plane still had 1 hour of fuel, but it obviously continued to fly deeper into the Atlantic Ocean until it ran out of fuel and sank to the bottom of the sea. The pilot may have attempted a ditching at sea but failed in the darkness and died. Rescuers were unable to find the wreckage or bodies of the plane, which had apparently sunk deep into the sea. Nicknamed the Iron Bird, the Avenger weighs 14,000 pounds when empty. Once it hits the sea, it quickly sinks to the bottom of the sea. But the tragedy was not over. At 7:27 p.m. that day, 2 Martin Mariner seaplanes took off for rescue. One of them exploded 23 minutes after takeoff, killing all 13 crew members on board. The Mariner seaplane is prone to oil leakage and is nicknamed the flight fuel tank. If a crew member smokes or sparks occur for other reasons, it may explode and cause an accident. Sailors from the SS Gaines Mills witnessed the explosion and discovered the wreckage that fell to the surface. Subsequent official and unofficial investigations, including Cushers, concluded that Captain Taylor must bear the main responsibility for the disappearance of the 19th Flying Squadron. Taylor was not a good pilot and had a reputation for sloppiness. During World War II, he was rescued twice when he became lost at sea and had to parachute out of the aircraft. Taylor was also forced to abandon the aircraft and parachute a 3rd time at sea, but that time was not his responsibility. During this training flight, Taylor forgot to bring both his watch and basic navigational equipment. During the flight, he reported that his aircraft's compass was malfunctioning, but believed he could continue the flight based on visual inspection, claiming no assistance was needed. At 4:45, the base discovered that Taylor was obviously disoriented and asked him to hand over command to the following aircraft, but Taylor obviously did not do so. It can be seen from the call records that Taylor has been leading the squadron to sail in the wrong direction. As late as 6 o'clock, Taylor was still ordering the squadron to fly east, while at least 2 student pilots believed that they should fly west, but due to their discipline, they had to follow Taylor into the abyss. The base repeatedly asked Taylor to switch to a more reliable emergency channel for communications, but Taylor refused to do so. Therefore, the accident occurred mainly due to human error and secondly to poor weather. Although the weather was good when the 19th Squadron took off, it soon turned bad. Rescue aircraft reported encountering strong turbulence and hazardous flying conditions, while ships in the area reported storms and large waves. A lost and willful squadron leader takes an inexperienced student pilot on a night flight in bad weather. Death is almost inevitable and there is no mystery about it. But Taylor's relatives were unhappy with the findings. They appealed to the top brass of the U.S. Navy. In the late 1940s, the highest authorities in the U.S. Navy complied with the demands of Taylor's relatives, blaming bad weather and unknown factors for the accident. The unknown factor stimulates people's imagination. The crash of the 19th Flying Squadron became the most talked about mysterious story in the Bermuda Devil Triangle. It was intentionally or unintentionally added to the story in the dissemination, so the bad weather was said to be, the weather was very good at that time. See Zhao Juntao's Bermuda Triangle of Death, the same below. A training flight for student pilots was said to be, the 14 pilots participating in the training were also experienced veterans. Taylor's refusal to use the emergency communication channel was said to be, interference in radio contact. The Mariner rescue plane that exploded shortly after takeoff was said to have lost contact with the base and then disappeared. It seemed mysterious, but in fact it was just one of the many rescue planes dispatched that day. Just a frame. After this incident was disclosed in a more embellished way, the Bermuda waters became famous. As people pay more attention to this sea area, the unbelievable disappearance of the plane becomes more and more terrifying. At 22:30 on December 27, 1948, a District of Columbia 3 large civil aircraft took off from San Francisco Airport and passed over the Bermuda Sea. The ground control tower heard the captain's surprised words, "What's going on? Where are everyone singing Christmas carols?" No one thought about the meaning contained in this sentence. At 4:30 a.m. on the 28th, the flight also sent a telegram to the airport, approaching the airport, lights visible, ready to land. The airport was ready to accept the landing. But the District of Columbia 3 flight never landed at the airport. It disappeared before landing, and none of the crew or passengers survived. The plane was in normal contact with the airport a minute ago, and the disappearance seemed to happen in an instant. It was like there was a hole in the sky and the plane fell into the hole without any sound. 2. Voyager's Cemetery. What kind of sea is the Bermuda Triangle? From what we saw and heard about Columbus, who was the first to sail through this sea area, we may be able to get a glimpse of some conditions in this sea area 300 years ago. In 1502, when Columbus traveled to America for the 4th time, he passed through the Bermuda Triangle. On this day, Columbus stood on the bow of the ship and saw a clear sky and calm sea. Suddenly, a strong wind blew up, the sky became dark, and huge waves dozens of meters high rushed towards the fleet like a wall. The sailors worked together to try to change the course, but all the navigation instruments on the ship failed. The needle on the magnetic compass was not pointing due north, but pointing northwest, deviating 6 degrees. The boat was out of control and was being pushed around by the wind and waves. Columbus was lucky. After several days and nights of turbulence, the ship finally did not sink. What surprised him was that the storm that fell from the sky suddenly stopped. The wind and waves ended as soon as they said they were over, and everything calmed down immediately. Columbus wrote all this in detail in his voyage diary. In his letter to the King of Spain, he also talked about this unforgettable experience. At that time, the waves were rolling, and we couldn't see the sun or stars for 8 or 9 days. I have seen all kinds of storms in my life, but I have never encountered such a long and violent storm. In August 1840, a French sailing ship, L'Ocali, was sailing on the Sea of Bermuda. The ship had its sails pulled, and the sails were full, indicating that it was sailing calmly. Confusingly, it seems to be floating in the wind without any purpose. People felt strange and rowed boats to get closer. They found the ship to be quiet. After boarding the ship, I found that there was no one on the ship, but the silk and other goods in the cargo hold were intact, and the fruits were still fresh and no one had touched them. However, why were all the sailors on the ship gone? No one can answer the question. The only surviving creature on the ship is a half-starved golden bird. Unfortunately, it cannot speak. No one knows exactly what happened on the ship, but everyone knows that something incredible must have happened on the ship. 3. Balloon missing for 36 years reappears. In 1954 in the Caribbean, pilots Charlie Rogan and Derek Norton piloted a balloon and 50 other contestants to participate in the balloon transoceanic race. The weather was clear and the view was clear. Suddenly, in front of everyone, the balloon mysteriously disappeared. In 1990, balloons that disappeared for many years suddenly appeared over the seas of Cuba and North America. Its appearance has caused great tension between the Cuban and U.S. governments. Cuba, in particular, mistakenly believed that the United States had sent a secret weapon to attack. Major Jaime Eguido, a Cuban pilot, said, "One minute there was nothing in the sky, and the next minute there was a balloon there." At that time, the Cuban military discovered the balloon on radar and thought it was from the United States. A secret weapon, a plane was sent to shoot it down. In the end, the big balloon was forced to land at sea by a Cuban plane. The two pilots were rescued by a cruiser and sent to a secret naval base in Cuba for trial. This strange thing not only surprised the Cubans, but also puzzled the two pilots Norton and Logan. The two pilots said they were participating in a balloon race from Summer Bay to Puerto Rico. They didn't know that 36 years had passed. They just felt a slight tingling sensation all over their bodies, as if a weak electric current was flowing through their bodies. Then in the blink of an eye, everything in front of them, including the sea and the sky, turned into a grayish-white. Then they remember a Cuban plane appearing in front of their balloon. Chicago investigator Carl Gore verified the speeches of Rogan and Norton and found that they indeed mysteriously disappeared while participating in a balloon competition in 1954. Gore believed that the balloon entered a time tunnel. It may be just a moment to them, but 36 years have passed on Earth, which is a big difference. Therefore, it is said that this is a magical tunnel that is slower than Earth time. There are many more cases similar to the above, but the common point is that time slows down when the missing person reappears. However, there are also cases where the missing person feels that time has sped up. Unfortunately, these are just hypotheses, and each hypothesis can only explain a certain phenomenon, but cannot completely solve the mystery of the 100 Acts. What's more, in addition to the unexplained disappearance of planes and ships, there are also some incredible strange things under the sea and on the sea surface of Bermuda. That's it for today's show. If you haven't subscribed and liked it yet, please help me. I wish you all a nice day and see you in the next show.